ואנו מכריזים בזאת
At a time when Israel is facing perhaps the greatest existential threat since the Yom Kippur War, the outcome of the upcoming US election is more critical to Israel than any time in our history. With this election less than 2 months away, I've invited a friend and a colleague, former Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, to share with us his perspectives on what might be lying in wait for Israel. Ambassador Ettinger has been an insider in US-Israel relations for decades, with first-hand knowledge and personal contacts. He served as Minister for Congressional Affairs at Israel's embassy in Washington, D.C., and later as the Israeli Consul General, ambassador in Houston, Texas. And he knows what made America ticks. He also is an expert on the Middle East politics. So, Yoram, welcome to the View from Israel.
Thank you very much.
Right, yeah, I'd like to compartmentalize, if I call it that, two aspects of the upcoming election with an eye on its political impact for Israel. First, the presidential race, and then the impact of the congressional election. Let's start with the presidential contest between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Talk about what you know about the track record of both candidates as it relates to Israel, and also what your gut feeling tells you about the effect on Israel.
Well, first and foremost, we should be aware that foreign policy issues, even national security issues, are not the paramount considerations for the voters. American voters are preoccupied with local issues, namely congressional district issues, state issues, national issues. Foreign and national security usually take back seat, if at all, impact the voting pattern, and that includes also the current Israel-Hamas and Israel-Hezbollah and Israel-Iran wars. Secondly, the key issues in my mind, which should concern Israel, are not those directly related to certain aspects of Israel-Hamas or Israel-Hezbollah or Israel-Iran war, but rather U.S. defense policy. Will the next American president expand or constrict, reduce the defense budget? A president which reduces defense budget does also reduce U.S. posture of deterrence, and reduction of U.S. or erosion of U.S. posture of deterrence has an impact. It produces tailwind to rivals and enemies of the U.S., tailwind to rogue organizations, rogue regimes, and that's bad news for allies of the U.S. A president who expands the defense budget sends a message. And the message is that that president is aware of the increase or intensifying threats to America, and that automatically enhances the U.S. posture of deterrence. Another element which is very, very critical is will the next president approach Iran as a partner for negotiation, a partner for diplomatic option, or will the next president realize that the 45-year-old track record of the Ayatollahs in Iran are inconsistent with the assumption behind diplomatic option, the rogue track record of the Ayatollahs, the rogue anti-American track record consistently since February 1979, when the Ayatollahs took over control of Iran. Such a track record makes the Ayatollah of Iran a target for regime change, not for diplomatic option. Minimally, I would say intensified sanctions, certainly not softening sanctions and not suspending sanctions. When it comes to the track record of the two candidates for presidency, there is one who already served as a president and has a track record. No one can be certain that Trump, in this case, will replicate his track record if he's elected, but that's the most objective basis to shape assumptions for a future Trump policy. And Trump, as a president, imposed very severe economic sanctions on Iraq, which almost shattered the Iranian economy and therefore reduced dramatically the Ayatollah's potential assistance to terror organizations throughout the world, including Hamas and Hezbollah. We are talking about the Trump administration, which certainly increased the defense budget and therefore increased or bolstered U.S. posture of deterrence. President Trump, when he was at the White House, did go through certain groundbreaking, game-changing policies towards Israel. He was the first American president to recognize reality of Jerusalem, namely the capital of the Jewish state, the exclusive capital of the Jewish state. He was the first president to implement an American law which called for recognition of Jerusalem as the exclusive capital and relocate the embassy of the U.S. from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He was the first American president to recognize Israel's sovereignty on the Golan Heights. He was the first American president to recognize the fact that Jewish communities in Judea, Samaria are not illegal according to international law. And he was the first American president to suspend foreign aid to the Palestinian Authority until the Palestinian Authority uproots hate education. He did likewise to the UN Relief and Work Agency, which subsidizes much of the education in the Palestinian Authority. And on both cases, he preconditioned renewal of foreign aid upon uprooting hate education. And he certainly was the first American president to close down the PLO office in Washington, the office of one of the most horrific terror organizations in the world. He closed it down in Washington, and he was also the president who got out of the 2015 nuclear accord with Iran, which enabled Iran to violate its commitments. But more than that, the 2015 agreement with Iran stipulated that by 2025, the Ayatollahs of Iran were home free to continue their pursuit of nuclear capabilities. And President Trump recognized that the 2015 was self-defeating, self-destructive from the American point of view, from the free world point of view. Now, will President Trump follow the same policy also if he returns to the White House? No one can be certain, but that's certainly the most objective basis for any assumption of about Trump if he is once again entering the White House. When it comes to Kamala Harris, there are few ways of assessing her foreign relations, national security policy, including, not only, but including Israel. And that's the nature of the people that are running her national security and foreign policy right now, have been with her for a number of years, and probably will be with her if she is elected. Obviously, we cannot ignore her own track record until now, coming from the San Francisco area, being a member of a pretty radical wing of the Democratic Party, having a very well-documented track record in the Senate among the more radical Democrats in the Senate. But again, more importantly, is the identity of her own choice for national security, foreign policy top advisors, for a simple reason: she hasn't been involved in that. Certainly, vice presidents ordinarily do not take a serious part in the formulation of foreign policy, national security, and Kamala Harris was not a top player, a heavyweight or middleweight player in the formulation of Tony Blinken's policy, because Tony Blinken has been the guy shaping, navigating President Biden's policy. Kamala Harris, top person until this very moment where we are talking, is Philip Gordon. And Philip Gordon is an open book as far as his own worldview from the time he was President Obama's top advisor on the Palestinian issue specifically and the Middle East at large. And since he became Kamala Harris' national security advisor, he is known for his multilateralist worldview, namely preferring to shape a policy shared with the United Nations, shared with international organizations and with Europe, rather than an independent American national security action. Part of that has been his very clear attitude towards Iran, a UN-like, an international organization-like attitude towards Iran, and he has been known in his very, very close contacts with the Ayatollahs of Iran before the formulation of the 2015 JCPOA, and until this very day, Philip Gordon opposed every single milestone decision by President Trump on Israel and the Palestinian issue. He opposed the relocation of the American embassy to Jerusalem, the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's exclusive capital, and part of the rationale of his opposition was the very unrealistic assumption, which is characteristic of the establishment of the State Department where he comes from. And his assumption was that recognizing Jerusalem as capital of Israel is going to cause a volcanic eruption in the Islamic world, in the Middle East. It could end Israel's peace accords with Egypt and Jordan, would undermine severely America's position in the Middle East, none of which had anything or has anything to do with Middle East reality. He opposed the recognition of Israel's sovereignty on the Golan Heights. He certainly considers Jewish presence in Judea, Samaria, supposedly illegal, contrary to the decision by President Trump's White House, recognizing the fact that international law does not contradict the existence of Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, and certainly he opposed suspending foreign aid to the Palestinian Authority, wholeheartedly supported the renewal of foreign aid under President Trump without preconditioning it upon the uprooting of hate education. And certainly Philip Gordon considers the establishment of a Palestinian state as a crown jewel of U.S. policy in the Middle East, again disregarding the fact that there are 6 peace accords between Israel and Arab countries. In none of them did any Arab country precondition the signing of peace accord with Israel upon the establishment of a Palestinian state. Saudi Arabia and Israel have had pretty positive cooperation in the areas of defense, commercial cooperation, irrigation, agriculture, technologies, high-tech cooperation, and at no point did the Saudis precondition it upon the establishment of a Palestinian state. This is the track record of Kamala Harris's #1 guy, most trusted guy as of this moment in the area of foreign policy, national security policy. His deputy, Rebecca Friedman Lissner, shares the same worldview, or else she wouldn't get the job as his deputy. She also wrote a number of books. In one of them, she criticized what she calls America's excessive policies in the world, calling to temper down America's role, assumption of power in the world today. There is a third guy that was appointed by Kamala Harris recent weeks to be her point man with the Jewish community in the States, Ilan Goldenberg. Ilan also is an open book. He is certainly a fellow Palestinian, a fellow Ayatollahs of Iran diplomatic option. He is enamored with the idea of a Palestinian state, and again, like his colleagues, opposed recognizing Jerusalem as capital of Israel. In fact, his suggestion was that if at all there would be such recognition, it should be tied up to Israel's willingness, or it should be preconditioned upon Israel's willingness to establish a Palestinian state. And those are the three key people around Kamala Harris. I'm not certain that the three of them or any of them are going to be with her if she is elected. But at this point, those are the three people setting Kamala Harris' foreign policy and national security policy.
Yes, you're right to pick on these two individuals. You know, I quote an infamous count in French history, who was named as the Count of Clermont-Tonnerre, who wrote in the aftermath of the French Revolution, and I quote, "We must refuse everything to Jews as a nation and accord everything to Jews as individuals." Now, if you take that quotation and you apply it with today's Democrat Party, and as you have outlined with the profiles of Philip Gordon and Ilan Goldenberger, the Jews, I have to add that Ilan Goldenberg, for instance, had long-standing ties with an anti-Israel Jewish group, J Street, for instance. And I find this sort of pattern, which seems to be a historical one, that bleeds into the Judaism of the progressives in America and other countries that believe in universal values rather than traditional Judaism. And you end up with Jews that refuse anything to do with the Jews as a nation and accord everything to Jews as individuals. And this plays out in the individuals that you have mentioned that have played active roles and will play potentially active roles in the future Democrat administration under Kamala Harris and Tim Walz as well. The other things that Goldenberg was in fact associating himself so deeply with an anti-Israel Jewish group, J Street as well, that he said that the United States must publicly criticize the Israelis in order to pressure them into the ceasefire. This is only one of the pressures they intend putting on, because he was also behind some of the executive orders against Jews in Judea and Samaria as well. And he's been a vocal clinic, this is Goldenberg, was a vocal clinic of Trump actually moving the US embassy to Jerusalem, saying it would be a destructive move vis-a-vis their plans for the creation of a Palestinian state. So this is where we have conflict going on between either a potential Trump administration for the Republicans and one a Harris administration for the Democrats, with the leading Jewish advisors and the people behind the screen, the people that pull the strings and write the speeches and makes the politics, like Philip Gordon and like Ilan Goldenberger. Whereas on the other hand, you are likely to see under a Trump presidency reemergence of David Friedman, for instance, as the next US ambassador to Israel, again, pro-Israel. And therefore, we're approaching these elections on a presidential matter on, I think, a critical outcome for Israel. My final question to you is quite frankly, if we're going to end up with a more radical Democrat president in the White House, do you see this as a potential existential threat for Israel, especially as we've heard under both Biden and also on Harris about the potential freezing of arms shipments to Israel, particularly at a time when we may have to take steps against Hezbollah, and perhaps even stronger than that, against Iran, and not being provided with the tools to do the job by Democrat administration?
Well, the issue of embargo or delayed supply of ammunition and military systems is still with us. It hasn't been resolved fully. And I would like to add one element we're not talking about the Democratic Party. We're not talking about the Democrats. As I mentioned, Vice President Kamala Harris, while in the Senate and before the Senate, certainly was part of the more radical Democratic wing of the party, of the Democratic Party. You're talking about a radical wing of the Democratic Party who are the progressives. And I'm not suggesting that Kamala Harris is a member of the progressive wing, although the gap between her views and the mainstream progressives is not very significant. But the fact is that the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is still a minority within that party. It's an assertive minority. It's a minority which has expanded in influence, and it remains to be seen if 2024 will sustain the growth proclivity, or will it show some backlash? Because the majority of Democrats are certainly more moderate, and the majority of Democrats have shown it again and again in their votes in the House and in the Senate, as well as in public opinion polls. There has been an erosion, a very worrisome erosion in Israel's favorability among Americans, among Democrats in particular, but in the US as a whole, majority still supports Israel, certainly over the Palestinians. And in the Democratic Party, when it comes to the House and the Senate, a very large majority among Democrats systematically votes in a very positive way during any Israel-related resolution or legislation.
I also have to add, before we close, a couple of points here, that Kamala Harris, rather than being in the Congress when Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel Prime Minister, came to give an address to the Congress, absented herself from her official job for some private event somewhere else, which was perceived as a slap in the face against Israel's Prime Minister. But also, I would add to that something that really alarmed me, that I recall another Jew, Chuck Schumer, the leading Democrat in the Senate, and we'll talk about this perhaps in our next conversation, in which he addressed the crowd of 300,000 people about a month or so after the horrific massacres of the 7th of October, in which he said how much he stood for Israel and cried never again. And yet months later, from his pulpit in the Senate, he was calling Israel to remove a duly elected Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. So it shows what I would call probably even worse than a strong affirmative alliance with Israel, but one that is troublingly waving. I don't know whether you want me to make a series of what these things that I just spoke about before we close.
Well, to be honest, I'm much more concerned about other issues than attending or not attending the Prime Minister's joint session speech. Obviously, it would be much more in accord with required relations between the U.S. and allies, the U.S. and a visiting leader of an ally. But I'm much more concerned about the Vice President's, for instance, support of sanctioning certain Israeli individuals while ignoring hate education in the Palestinian Authority. I am much more concerned about the vice president and, in fact, the president's tolerance of the horrific, despotic, corrupt, anti-American regime in Iran, which is the head of the anti-American, anti-free world octopus with arms not only in the Middle East, but all over the world, including in Latin America and including on the soil of the US. I'm much more concerned about that and the pressure that the president and the vice president put on allies such as Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Egypt due to their attitude towards Muslim Brotherhood terrorism, while the American president and vice president referred to the Muslim Brotherhood as if it was merely a religious, welfare, educational, political organization, ignoring the foundation, the terroristic foundation of the Muslim Brotherhood. And last and not least, much more concerned than we should be on attending or not attending a speech by Netanyahu is the pressure on Israel to snatch Hamas from the jaws of obliteration, ignoring the fact that Hamas is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a lethal threat to every single pro-American Arab ally, especially the oil-producing Arab allies. And rather than joining Israel in the battle against anti-American Islamic terrorism, we see pressure on Israel to suspend our war on the anti-American Hamas and anti-American Hezbollah and anti-American Iran.
I'm very pleased that you raised the issue of Biden's executive orders against Jews living in Judea and Samaria. We didn't see any executive orders punishing any of the Palestinians for their outrageous terror attack, not leaders of Hamas or anybody else. Neither did we hear Biden produce any executive orders even against Mahmoud Abbas for his pay-to-slay policy, which is the promotion and reward system for Palestinian terrorism. The more Jews you kill, the more money you get. I would have thought that should have been prime, top of the tree issue for executive orders. Neither did he issue any executive orders, as you rightly said, on Hamas, Islamic Jihad, or Hezbollah leaders. And I would suggest neither would President Harris. The other things that you hinted at as well, as we close, is that it was President Trump that advanced one of the most peace-making advances in the whole of the Middle East in the form of the Abraham Accords. And the Biden-Harris administration did zero, absolutely nothing to advance this further. And I am convinced that once, hopefully, that Trump re-enters the White House, the Abraham Accords would be top of his priority with the inclusion of Saudi Arabia into the ring of Arab moderate states. And this could be a future solution for Gaza, for instance. Yoram, I want to thank you for this. Thank you, viewers. Hope you found this instructive. Share this video with other people. And our next video with Ambassador Essinger will be involved in the role of the Senate and the House vis-a-vis the result of the upcoming election. This is Barry Shaw, The View from Israel.
אנו מכריזים בזאת